Second. Aye.
We have no information items this evening. The consent agenda contains approval of September 14th board minutes, approval of the check register for the Denver checking account, the surety account, and the 325 Lakewood checking account. And one further item, resolution 17-060, authorization to execute a second amendment to the memorandum of agreement with Gateway Nova LLC, extending the construction deadline for the stormwater facility from October 1, 2017 to November 7, 2017. Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda? Mr. Miller, is there a second? President's report. I have two district-sponsored meetings this week. The first one is the Prairie Seed collection out of the restoration on Saturday. Bushels of seeds were collected by volunteers and staff and distributed on the property. That's true.
How big is a bushel again?
And then Monday night I went to see the lake report for the doing, and two staff from the River going back and forth across the river and the lake, and giving a really good report. And then I'll add it in right here that the liaison appointment for Manny Becker and Olson to work with the consultant on HR have they completed their task, and they did very much that, and the liaison position just Manager Loftus, can you give us a report on Operation Control?
We discussed the records retention for digital and paper. There's about 400 boxes of paper set in cold storage, which needed to be addressed given we would need to pay to store them in a different location. So we won't have that location available. We have an existing policy that we follow, and at the committee level we talked about continuing to support that policy and that there wasn't a need to change that given it was sufficient and no one saw the need to incur a storage cost to have a redundant paper copy when we have 3 levels of technology backup. So it was a robust discussion, and at this point that committee would not recommend a change to policy. Certainly open to other members who aren't on that committee, but that is where the committee stands at this point. Second item we discussed were the mod resolutions policy. If you have any suggestions for legislation or policy that the mod group should be looking at, you can send those to Lars at this point. President White is on that committee as well, so she's well versed in what they are proposing. The third item we discussed was an update on the HR plan. It was just last month that the board gave a map to the organization on where we should be come December, and our administrator gave us a report on where we are to date, and everybody affirmed their confidence that it will be implemented well and on time. And lastly, there were some comments about some notices from banks, which will be a wire transfer and a surety account, which the administrator will bring up under his report this evening.
Thank you.
And that concludes what we discussed.
Thank you. The upcoming meeting and event schedule is printed here. Manager Loftus is liaison for the Citizens Advisory Committee meeting October 11th. And the meetings through the remainder of October are spelled out there. We'll move to item 11.1.
I had a report.
Oh, I do apologize.
This Southwest LRT Community Works had a subcommittee meeting chaired by Jan Callison for the 325 Lake Road project, And on the committee is a council member from St. Louis Park, Ann Mavity, a council member from Hopkins, I don't remember her name.
Halverson.
What?
Halverson?
Yes. And Mayor Hovland from Edina, and myself. And James made a presentation on how this project sits in Antioch Preserve in the Greenway, and all the other activities going forward in the area that we're sponsoring and that have been undertaken by other people that contribute to the place. And we are going to bring back, the staff is working on a request for qualifications for master developer for the project that the committee will review, and that will be ready sometime in October. End of October. And when the committee reviews it and approves it, then the city of Hopkins will, together with our board, authorize its issuance. And it's a complicated and sensitive issue because we're the landowner, and the city is, the authorizing agent for zoning and PUD, et cetera, tax increment. So it's got to be a very good partnership to make sure that all of our needs and wishes are met, and that we're not assuming costs that we wouldn't normally as a landowner. And so that's going to be a sensitive and interesting development in the next few months. And we've got tremendous cooperation from the county staff in the Community Works Department and the planners in the city of Hopkins. They're very knowledgeable. There's been the county and the city and Metro Council have authorized at least 5 different studies for Blake Road and the site in the area, and so there's a lot of really good information. And James, I think it might be helpful if we gave the board copies of those studies, just to get an idea how it sits and what the magnitude of the opportunity is, and because it's not going to be an ordinary kind of thing. It's not the magnitude of the Ford plant or the Twin City Arsenal, but it's probably in a lot of ways a better position than those other projects. The other 2 projects got water though. One's on the river and one's on Rice Creek, and they do have their watershed districts very involved, but neither one of them own the land. Ford owns the land in St. Paul, and Twin City Arsenal is, I don't know who owns that. Ramsey County owns that, but it's in the city of Arden Hills. So there's sensitive developments there also. So it's be interesting, and if you get copies of the studies and got more questions, we'll have a work session to go over those. But it's pretty basic kind of stuff. Total transit-oriented development, sizing and scoping of the buildings and all that kind of stuff. But it'll be interesting.
We can bring those forward on the 12th because we're providing a progress update, the planning committee, with the draft RFQ. So it'll be in text format, not final layout. And those are all appendices to the request for qualifications, those studies. So the board will get that packet on the 12th.
We didn't authorize to say we participated in a couple of fundings.
The transit-oriented development roadmap is the one that we participated funding with the county in partnership with the city of Hopkins.
Okay. The rest of them were done by Liz and Metro Council and Hennepin Regional Rail Authority, et cetera.
Back in 2012, there was a marketing study.
Yeah, there's been, yeah, at least one. It's been around, it's been studied well.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Christopher. 11.1, Ms. Christopher, Resolution 17061.
Before we get on, I didn't catch the schedule for the, oh, that's operations and programs. I thought it was a plan. The planning committee meeting will be at 5, is it 5:30 we're meeting? Jessica? What time are we meeting on our subcommittees?
5 or 5:15?
5:15 will be this new schedule for both meetings apparently.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm sorry to interrupt.
No, it's good. Now you're on.
Thank you. Madam Chair, managers, staff is requesting authorization to distribute responses to comments received on the draft watershed management plan during the 60-day review period. There were 34 letters received in total that are in your packet. The comments were distributed and discussed briefly at the last PPC meeting. As discussed in general, there was very strong support for the district's approach and direction that we've taken with this plan. 10 of the letters that we received were either letters or resolutions of support, and then many, or the majority of the others that had comments also expressed support along with their comments. So I was very pleased with the response that we've gotten. In general, we've kind of grouped the feedback that we've gotten into 3 categories, kind of those supportive comments, a number of kind of more minor or technical type comments, such as, correcting typos or map errors, asking for clarification, definitions, or a lot of it was related to volume 2 and just adding additional data or information on kind of parameters, frequency, those types of things. And then kind of that last category is kind of the more substantive or policy related comments that we highlighted a few at the PPC meeting, and I'll talk through some of them this evening. And so I've got kind of 7 topics that I flagged to kind of talk through in terms of the comments that we got, how we characterized the response, and then any edits that we'll be making in response to those. And then we can address any others that the board would like to discuss in addition to those. So starting with quantifiable goals, and I've got the comment numbers on there just for reference if you want to look in your packet. But basically we received comments from Bowser and the MPCA related to kind of more quantifiable, measurable goals, and specifically interested to know what we think we'll achieve in the 10-year period. In many cases, we set kind of our ultimate goal as the TMDL targets, and that's what we're going to measure our progress against. But they wanted to know kind of how far we think we'll get towards that in the 10-year period. And so staff met last week with Bowser and PCA staff and had a good discussion on the topic, just kind of looking for their guidance. I think they understand our concerns and how we tried to avoid kind of being too kind of metric and goal oriented and too prescriptive this time around, as we did with the last plan, and that I think they understand that there's a lot of kind of challenges with setting realistic targets on a 10-year time frame, and a lot of uncertainty involved in kind of the district's approach and trying to integrate with land use and be responsive to opportunities. And so kind of where we landed basically is that they would like to see just where we have specific projects identified in our priority geographies, that we provide estimates for what those projects will achieve, which we already generally have in most cases pretty solid estimates. They are still estimates, obviously, at this point. That'll be refined, but those will be added to those kind of specific project boxes within the subwatershed plans, and that's kind of the only edit that they asked for to address that. In addition, though, we will be also kind of expanding the narrative in 3.7, the evaluation and reporting section, just to further explain kind of our goal setting framework and how it's adaptive, and there's kind of different layers to it, from the strategic goals to kind of the long-term, multi-decade TMDL goals to kind of the shorter-term project-specific goals, and how we'll continue to kind of have that feedback through our annual reporting with the state to track our progress towards those. So that's how we're addressing that one. The second one there is, we got a few comments regarding our role in flooding, with a few of the cities requesting that the district either clarify its role in flood mitigation or have greater emphasis on flood mitigation in the plan. And generally our response, we discussed that we consider the cities to have lead role in flood prevention and management, basically by virtue of their role in land use planning, development regulation, owning and operating the stormwater conveyance systems, and being the implementing authority for floodplain management programs and those kinds of things. And then we characterize the district's role primarily as managing the regional system through operating Grays Bay Dam, providing cities and the public with flood prediction data using our model, preserving flood storage through our regulations of floodplain fill, and then finally implementing and promoting stormwater management practices through our projects, our rules, our grants, etc. And finally, we talked about how the district is happy and willing to serve as a technical resource to help cities address and find solutions to flooding problems, and that we, through that involvement, may choose to participate in a project on a case-by-case basis if we deem that it aligns with our goals and priorities. So essentially that's how we've addressed that one. And in terms of any plan edits, we will be expanding the kind of description of our role in section 3.4 related to flooding. Feel free to stop me on any of these with questions. Otherwise, I'll keep moving through the list. Number 3, we received comments from both Minneapolis and the Park and Rec Board about how they'd like to, rather than prioritizing implementation in areas that are experiencing development or redevelopment, they expressed that they'd like to see the district focus in areas that essentially are already developed, where improvements may not otherwise happen without our leading them or being involved. And in our response, we explained that development and redevelopment is not kind of the sole thing that we're considering in terms of where we prioritize. There's other landscape changes that present opportunities as well. And through kind of the current partnership and MOU with the City and Park Board, we're prioritizing and actively working on the Creek Corridor and in coordination with road and park improvements and other things that are happening on the landscape. And those projects are identified in our plan as priorities. And so we're not planning on making any edits related to that, but that's how those comments are being responded to. The fourth item there is related to our TMDL credit sharing policy that the board adopted back in 2013. There was a comment from Minnetonka about essentially if we're still following that policy, and just acknowledging that the PCA, our current PCA staff, guidance conflicts in terms of how credit is allocated. As some of the managers may recall, under our policy, basically we said that for any work the district does, the credit for that will be kind of allocated throughout the whole drainage area according to the same formula that was used for the TMDL. So basically we're acknowledging that we get our funding through the levy from all the communities, and where we do a project is just based on opportunities. It doesn't mean that all the credit should go towards that city. It should kind of be benefiting all the cities within that drainage area. Under current PCA guidance, the credit would all go towards the city where it's located. And so there's a little bit of a conflict there that we want to work through with the state in terms of having consistent policy on how that's handled. And so we are planning to include reference to the policy in our plan and state that we're going to be working with the state to work through that and try to have consistency in how that's managed moving forward, but that's still kind of our approach that we prefer.
Is that how they do it for other watershed districts?
That's, yeah, how it's done statewide. So at the time that we adopted the policy, we were in the process of developing a couple of the TMDLs, and the policy was actually written into those TMDLs because current staff supported it. And so, like I said, that's what we intend to follow, and that's how we intend to track and report and to kind of let cities know how credit's being allocated. And so it's just a matter of, I think, working with current PCA staff to kind of bring that change around, hopefully. Moving on to the fifth item there, there were a few comments regarding the E-grade program, asking for further kind of clarity on kind of where it current status, what parameters are being measured, how, when, those kinds of things, and if there are any expectations for the cities that they should be aware of. So in response, we clarified that the program is still in development. We're still developing some of the metrics, collecting the data, and that once that's complete, we intend to update the plan to incorporate the new information, and that there won't be any kind of new requirements or additional effort by the cities as a result of this. It's just kind of more information that we can all use to understand the resources and the strategies needed to address issues. So in terms of edits, R&M staff is working on some reorganization and just providing some additional clarification in Volume 2 about how that program works and how it's going to be rolled out. The sixth item there that we mentioned at PPC as well is that we got a couple of comments, I think from Edina and Minnetonka, on the district's grant programs and the discontinuation of the homeowner grants. The cities expressed that they'd like to see us continue that or provide other ways to engage or provide technical assistance to homeowners. So our response essentially is that we spent a lot of time going through and reviewing the program, and that we feel we can be kind of most effective by prioritizing grant dollars towards projects that produce greater measurable water quality improvement, and that there are a number of other kind of resources available for homeowners in terms of workshops that the district hosts, a lot of educational materials that are available, the Master Water Stewards program, and things like that. So that's kind of how that response was written, and we're not proposing any edits in response to that. And then finally, the last one I had flagged here is the letter from the Zumbra Homeowners Association that was also briefly discussed at PPC. And their letter talked about the water level concerns on Zumbra and outlined what they see as priority issues needing action in the subwatershed, and some suggested areas to work with the city on things like zoning and development changes. And in the response, the district, we described the district's efforts to date to coordinate with the city, the HOA, DNR, and others to understand the flooding issue and find a solution. And we also talked about kind of the process over the last couple of years, working with the city and others to establish priorities for the subwatershed and how those really drove what's in the plan. And then finally talked about the September 11th Victoria Council meeting where this letter was discussed, and that our understanding is that the city would take the lead to evaluate whether they would like to see more district involvement or different priorities or anything like that. We look for that direction to come from the city. So as the board knows, staff continues to work closely with the city, county, DNR, Three Rivers, and the HOA to kind of analyze the water level concern out there. And the HOA recently contacted the DNR with the concern, and DNR has gone out and done some field surveys on the culverts, and I believe there's a meeting next week with the agencies to kind of review that new information prior to meeting with the HOA and kind of determining next steps. So that's kind of where that stands. We're not proposing any edits in response to that. So those are, like I said, a few that I wanted to highlight for the board's attention, and certainly take any questions or discuss any others that the board would like to.
Manager Olson?
How do you go about sending the responses back out? Do you respond to the individuals who ask them, or publishing them for everybody?
Manager Olson, managers, my plan is to send out a letter to the cities, counties, agencies, and any other commenters with a copy essentially of this table that has all the responses and kind of, you know, where they can find responses to their particular questions or comments. And then,
That's electronically?
yep, electronically.
They're not going to get this many 6 page.
Right. I think we'll post the comment letters on the website so people can find them if needed, but otherwise I would just be sending out the table electronically.
Thank you.
Other questions? May I have a motion to get the resolution before us?
And actually, if I could
Go ahead.
have just a couple other comments, sorry. I did, well, so the resolution as written allows for non-substantive edits just upon further staff review, but there's just a couple edits that I wanted to note that I am planning on making. On number 15, there was a comment from DNR about mentioning or including mention of the shoreland management standards. And my response in the version you have is that we would look to add a reference to that. But upon further review, we already do mention it within the LGU requirements section, and I think that kind of adequately addresses the concerns based on conversation I had with the DNR. So we'll be modifying that one. And then number 153 was regarding basically projects such as, you know, or activities such as cart management or alum dosing are not considered capital projects or don't meet the definition of capital projects. And so there's language in the plan indicating that some of those can be done programmatically and aren't subject to capital project procedures. And so I'm just clarifying the response there. Basically, Bowser asked that we kind of check with them before making that determination.
Can I ask a question on that? Is elm dosing a capital improvement or a maintenance?
It's Manager Miller, managers, it does not meet kind of the definition of a capital improvement in terms of being like a, I don't know, permanent change on the landscape. I don't remember the exact language. But we have in the past ordered it and followed capital project procedures, and I think intend to for the future. We've included them in the CIP. So even though we're not necessarily required to,
Okay.
I think we would recommend following those processes. So basically the response is just that we, rather than the way
reason I
I
ask that is I don't think it's you know, we may follow it on notices and all that as a capital project, but
Mhm.
I wonder, I wouldn't think it's eligible for debt financing, for instance, because there's no permanent improvement. It's just a maintenance kind of thing. Okay. All right, I'm fine.
Manager Olson.
Would a cart removal program be capital?
No.
no.
So it would follow the same.
Right, and so that is described, cart management is specifically mentioned under our research and monitoring program in the plan as a programmatic activity.
But Bowser just wants you to check with them on these kinds of things.
Basically, and so the way I had characterized the response was that, you know, yes, we'll check with you if it's, you know, falls into that category, but we just have kind of recharacterized that as, you know, when the characterization of improvement is uncertain, we'll coordinate. So it kind of puts the ball in our court in terms of making that decision instead of automatically checking with them every time. So just a slight change. But, that was all I wanted to mention in terms of edits. And then in terms of next steps, we're already kind of underway making a lot of the revisions in the plan. And again, we're kind of grouping, you know, tackling first kind of the bigger substantive revisions so that they can be ready for board review on the 12th. And then buying ourselves a couple more weeks to finish kind of all the minor edits and typos and those kinds of things by October 25th. But October 12th is when we're scheduling the public hearing to collect further input, and then I'll have red lines of those substantive changes for the board's review, and we'll be requesting authorization to release to the state agencies for final 90-day review, pending any further input that we get at the hearing. Then again, we'd have to till the 25th to kind of finalize all the minor edits and get it distributed. And then I'm anticipating board action on the December 21st meeting based on their board schedule. And then with the way the holidays are, that means we wouldn't be able to actually adopt until January 11th. So that's kind of the dates we're looking at moving forward.
Thank you. No, I'm not cutting you off if I ask for a motion.
Nope,
Okay.
I'm done.
Is there a motion to approve the resolution? Manager Rogers, is there a second? Manager Olson, any further discussion or questions? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you.
Thank you.
Magnum opus. I was impressed with, of course, the plan, but also with the amount of attention that all of the commentators gave and the thoughtful answers that they gave to them. It says a lot for the process that you followed and the amount involved, and I think with our communities too. So thank you.
Great, thank you.
Item 12.1, the Carver County Finance Draft Review. Mr. Whisker.
Okay. Oh, there we go. All right, Chair White, managers, I'm pretty excited to be here tonight presenting finally a preliminary request for board action on the master finance agreement between Carver County and Minnehaha Creek Watershed District. As you know, this is something that's taken a considerable amount of time to build an understanding and support for. This is essentially a first in Carver County from what I understand working with their CFO and recent conversations with county commissioners. But pleased to report that on Tuesday, the Carver County Commissioners moved the master finance agreement that was in draft out of work session towards final action on October 17th. So before we jump in, I wanted to thank Manager Olson for his assistance, providing a lot of background information, context, building support with the county board, Mr. Smith for his back and forth with county staff and bond counsel on drafting, and President White and Manager Miller, who've been kind of involved from the beginning, tracking how things have been progressing. Tonight, I'm going to provide a briefing on the agreement, of course, with a request that it be advanced to October 12th for final action, perhaps with a few small minor modifications that I'll outline. And in terms of content for tonight, before jumping into the what of the finance agreement, what it is and how it works, I want to provide a little bit of background on why we need it, why we need the agreement as a finance tool to complement the funding strategy the board's helped us develop for the 6 Mile Halsted Bay Partnership. And to do that, I'm essentially going to recap and step through the presentation, how I had presented it to the Carver County Commissioners, providing you a little bit of context for the discussion that we had on Tuesday with them in work session. Okay, so when we met with Manager Olson wasn't able to make it. He was out on the West Coast.
And he later note that it passed.
Yeah.
Never thought it was out of trouble.
Well, his name came up. So when we met with the county board, I had started out by providing a little bit of background on our philosophy and approach. We'd spent a few minutes walking through how our philosophy and approach had shifted, and that we had at our core this belief in integrated planning through partnership. And I stressed for them that model and shift in direction was front and center in our 10-year plan, and we received, as you just heard and you've been discussing for a while now, an overwhelming amount of support for that approach. And that's when Manager Olson and the board's name came up. Several commissioners acknowledged that there was indeed a visible shift in our strategic and tactical approach out in their neck of the woods, that they were hearing a lot of positivity from the city of Victoria and other folks and thought leaders within the community, and credited the board and Manager Olson for showing some leadership in how we're working with local communities to get work done. And so we covered the principle that natural systems underpin community identity and serve to create social and economic value. And that's really what we were bringing fresh to Carver County with our approach, that the district's made it its practice over time to work in ways that complement local priorities, working to integrate and position its water resource improvements with transportation and infrastructure, parks and open space, and economic development and growth. And that essentially, really what we're doing is working to bridge the planning gap between all those different sectors, whether it's development, transportation, water resources, parks and open space. And that's significant for them because there's a lot of growth pressure, and one of the county's strategic goals is how to sustainably and effectively manage the challenges of growth that are going to be happening out there. We talked about how that works in practice, so that's a great idea. What's our workflow? And so we stepped through that. The first thing the district does is it brings a robust technical understanding of the system to the table and creates a shared understanding of what's actually happening on this landscape. What are the water resource issues? What's causing those issues? And what can be done about those issues at a global level, at a high systems level, before designing a capital implementation program. And then the next step is mapping those local priorities through public-private engagement. And that's what we spent the last year doing, is what we explained with the 6 Mile Halsted Bay Partnership. And then our final step is to find the intersection of effort and integrate those two areas of planning, develop an implementation plan that everybody has shared understanding of, with perhaps the big component being how do you pay for that work, with local contributions, regional, state, federal dollars, the district's tax levy, and the financing that we're asking for from Carver County. We reviewed that it was those models and workflow that we'd spent the last year on with the 6 Mile Halsted Bay partners. So we've been working very closely with both Hennepin and Carver counties, the Carver SWCD, Three Rivers Park District, the St. Bonifacius, Minnetrista, Victoria, Laketown, and Waconia, through that planning process, developing the shared understanding of what's actually happening, mapping out where local plans are being prioritized, where investments are being made, both publicly and privately. We used Wasserman as an example. It's been the growth corridor for the city of Victoria. That's where all the planning work's been prioritized, guiding land use. West of that road, on the lower part of that picture, is the west growth area for the future that they're focused on their comprehensive plan right now. And we talked about how it's something of a first that the city of Victoria and the district are working on the natural resource imprint for that landscape and guiding land use around that, identifying where we can put regional stormwater management, where there may be wetland conflict, where we might do wetland banking, how that aligns with our long-range capital improvements through the comprehensive plan process. So we spent a little bit of time talking about methodology, but we also reviewed why we're out there to begin with, why we'd selected 6 Mile Halsted Bay as a planning and implementation priority. We talked about the large geographic area that serves not only as a headwaters for Halsted Bay, but also has a lot of local resources with 14 lakes and this 12 miles of stream system, thousands of acres of wetlands that have a number of federal, state mandates for local communities to make measurable progress towards impairments. We discussed the network and complex mosaic of stakeholders and political jurisdictions out here that require a level of coordination to address water resources at a systems level, and that doing all of those things in a way that effectively plans for the challenges and opportunities associated with planned growth out here are all great reasons for the watershed district to be involved on that leading edge of planning rather than reacting a decade later. We then started stepping into the actual plan development for the commissioners. We recapped the goals and guiding principles that the 6 Mile Halsted Bay partners had developed that were used to focus and guide then the more specific content of the plan, and recapped for the commissioners that that's something they'd been kind enough to pass a resolution of support for back in April of 2017. And then we given them a little taste of the actual the way that the plan's laid out in terms of our issue driver strategy model, to just break things down into simple terms. It's a huge geography. There's a lot going on in terms of the landscape that's being developed, and transportation and park planning, as well as water resources. So we try and keep things simple for folks. And we reviewed this issue driver strategy model with the example being water quality. I mean, that's one of the big focus goals for the district out here. Big issues are the impairments. And so we identified that outside of the lake, the main things driving water quality issues out in this geography are going to be runoff from the developing landscape. As we put more hardcover down, we're going to create more runoff. That there's altered wetlands that have been farmed, ditched, tiled, and those now are acting as nutrient pumps. They're sending phosphorus into our lakes. And then inside the lake, we have carp and sort of legacy legacy pollutant that's releasing phosphorus within the lakes. And so, at some level, what we need to do is relatively simple. We need to focus on stormwater management, both for retrofitting the existing landscape, as well as integrating that into new development plans, restore the wetlands, manage carp, and work on internal loading. Those are the big strategies that are driving our action. So when we look at capital projects, they should be measured and evaluated through that strategic lens. We then provided a number of examples for context regarding the type of work that we might be requesting financing for in the future, as well as to show them that we've been busy implementing. We're not just out here spending a year convening everybody, making nice maps, developing plans, figuring out how to pay for stuff. We've been doing work. And I think that was key, because in the past we've heard concern from the communities in Carver County out here that we're study heavy and implementation poor. So what we wanted to do is outline for them that we've been getting some great work done, and these are examples of the types of work that we'd be looking for support from the Master Financing Agreement in the future. So we covered East Auburn stormwater enhancement, reminding them that we'd secured $250,000 from Clean Water Legacy Fund to help treat the growth, expansion of downtown above and beyond regulatory requirements, as well as treat Church Lake before it goes into Auburn. We talked about the work that we've completed with Lennar that's getting into maintenance phase, stressing that we were able to keep about $250,000 of private investment in Carver County, rather than having that farmed out to somewhere like Washington County, where they would have purchased wetland bank credits. So we had them restore a local asset with private dollars just by streamlining how we'd approach that development from a regulatory perspective. We talked, of course, about the CART management plan, which Lars will provide a little bit of an update on later. We talked about the request that we'd made for about $800,000 of Outdoor Heritage Council funds. It sounds like today the final recommendation from the council was for less than that, about $590,000, but we're on track to receive a good portion of the funds that we're going to need to be successful out there with CART management, so that's exciting. And then we finished with Wasserman West, which we talked about both treating a significant portion of pollution for Wasserman Lake, but also that it's well integrated with parks and open space planning for the city in this growth area, providing park and public access to the lake that's programmed for the broader community, not just one particular housing development, but for the whole area around the lake. And we used it as an example to talk about the fact that we had strong support in this instance from Victoria to acquire land in fee, whereas in the past we'd had issues with them challenging our authority and getting crosswise because their land acquisitions weren't synced with their growth, with their planned investments in sewer, water, roads, connecting housing to schools, that sort of thing. And we also talked about this as a micro example of the creative financing that we're bringing to the table to get the work done, because while the district put the capital up for the land, that the city of Victoria is paying us back almost 95% of those costs through park dedication. So I think that served as good context for the commissioners to set the stage for why we've been requesting the financing and that we can get things done. This isn't just a pipe dream where we need the funding arrangement and the implementation comes later. We're already getting work done. And so I'd explained that the financing that we're seeking isn't funding the work, but it's providing long-term financing to complement the funds that the district's providing, that perhaps the city of Victoria or some other city is providing locally, and that complements the regional and state and federal funds that we'd outlined that we're already starting to secure. And so that in that sense, it should be viewed as really just a fiscal tool to help provide flexibility, creativity for this this partnership, the 6 Mile Halsted Bay partnership, to get the work done that's been outlined in the plan that the county's supported already. So in terms of how the finance agreement works, it's taken a year, but it's only 3 pages, so it's pretty simple. The district will independently secure short-term financing for capital improvements out here, and so those would be negotiable notes that would be temporarily placed up to 36 months, I believe, is our limit in statute. Then periodically, Carver County would issue general obligation bonds using its authority to replace that short-term financing. The timing of when that happens is based on the term for the short-term financing, whether we hit 36 months or whether we reach some level of cap for spending on those temporary obligations. So that's one way that will trigger the timing for bond issuance with the county. The other way is the county may just be planning their own issuance, so we might not have reached the term of 36 months or some predetermined spending cap. They may be issuing for a road or something like that, and they give us a year notice so that those short-term placements could get rolled up into the county's bond issuance. Of course, we'd be assuming the obligation for the debt service backed by our levy, so there would be no risk to Carver County's AAA rating or credit because it's backed by an independent tax authority in the district. And our debt service schedule would be summarized at the time of bond issuance in a promissory note issued by the district to the county. The total aggregate outstanding principal, or our cap for financing out here, is going to be $25 million. That matches the CIP in the 6 Mile Halsted Bay that's part of the comprehensive plan that we've outlined. So that's the reason we've chosen that number. And that closely matches and mirrors, the framework that we've got with Hennepin County too. So that's the basics of the financing, but then there's the coordination framework, or just the mechanics or logistics of how this happens, which is a little bit different than the arrangement that we have in Hennepin County. Carver County, with this being a first, that was a big part of the agreement, is making sure they're aware of what they're providing the financing for, and that they understand some of the community context, and that we have support for this work, and that there's periodic check-ins. So there's going to be a healthy degree of coordination, at least for the first several years. We talked somewhat jokingly in work session that after 24 months of working through this, they may get sick of seeing us on a quarterly basis or monthly basis, outlining the work that we're doing. But for now, in terms of project development, we'll be meeting semi-annually with the partnership. So the counties, the cities, essentially the committee structure that's been set up to develop the plan will be meeting twice a year. We'll be coordinating projects with individual communities, so like Victoria as well. And then projects that we feel are becoming eligible for financing would be coordinated with staff ahead of us requiring, or requesting rather, financing from the county board. While that's happening, on a parallel track, we'll do semi-annual work sessions with the Carver County Board. So in the beginning of the year, as is kind of our current practice, we talk about future plans, and then towards the end of the year, we might be talking about what we've accomplished. So we've got that check-in on where we're going as well as what we've accomplished. When it comes to requesting financing for an individual project, we'll be required to send written notice to see that we're wanting to seek bond issuance or use the master finance agreement for a project. That'll come in the form of a resolution passed by this board. And we have to work out, and it'll probably vary on projects, at what juncture is best to make that request. It could be a concept, it could be a little bit further into feasibility, it could be before we order the project into design. But essentially, before we move into design or acquisition, we'd be sending notice to Carver County that this is a project we'd like you to consider for long-term placement at some point in the future. That goes along with a legal opinion from council that the project that we're seeking financing for conforms to our watershed management plan. That's pretty standard and is structured the same way in Hennepin County. We provide an opinion from bond counsel as to tax exempt status on the interest for the obligation. And then after that, when that goes to the county board is going to approve, they're going to deny, or they're going to request more information and delay. I mean, that's essentially the action that the county board takes at that point in time. So we have to build this into our project management logistics, that when we're moving through concept, we have to build in now time to have that level of coordination and seek approval from the county board. They may opt under the current draft at that point in time at their discretion to hold a separate public hearing for constituents, where then the watershed district staff would show up and present the merits of the project and answer questions. It seems like through the work session discussion with county administrator and CFO over there, that they're willing to back off of that they don't need to mandate public hearing, that it could just be a public action at a meeting, which I think is maybe a distinction without a difference in some ways. But that's one of the things that could be slightly modified between now and the end of the month. And then, of course, there's a final decision at the time of bond issue. So it would go in front of the county board, and they'd be acting to issue bonds. But at that point, they're already obligated, because they'll have made the decision and taken formal action at that time that we've made the individual project request. So that's a little bit about the mechanics of how it works. And in terms of next steps, I've got an errant bullet there, but we'll be back on October 12th with the final draft for final watershed district board action, and then in front of the county board on the 17th, where Commissioner Workman and some others had just asked us to step through in more specifics the type of implementation. So he wants us to actually walk through the capital improvement program, which we didn't have time to do at the work session, because it was sort of a higher level discussion. And I guess with that, I'll take any questions.
Before going to questions, may I have a motion to advance this to the October 12th meeting before the action? Manager Olson, is there a second?
Second.
Manager Robbins. Question, Manager Miller.
The contrast between Hennepin and Carver is quite dramatic. Hennepin County doesn't want the Board of Commissioners doesn't want to know about the details. They've delegated everything to the finance director, and but this is something new for Carver, because they aren't used to issuing debt, and I think the work that James has done on this, and by engaging them, is not only develop the financing program, but also develop the further and deeper community support for the activities we're doing. And normally, you would think that it would be just a waste of time having public hearings and all that kind of stuff. But I think it's good for the long term. Make sure that everybody understands and there's not this confusion and stuff. I spent 35 years doing public finance, and the presentation that James just made, he could qualify to teach which I did teach a course, the MBA course at St. Thomas on public finance. I think he's eligible for adjunct professorship.
Probably not. Probably not.
The way he acquired all this information and used all the consultants and attorneys and everything, and made it his own presentation with his own credibility. It's outstanding work, James. I just want to tell you that I don't think that we could be anywhere near this if it wasn't for your abilities and personality to convince people that normally would not be too excited about doing something for the Minnehaha Creek Watershed District or for the environment, but bringing them to a point where they're not only supported but embrace it. So congratulations.
Thanks. I like to think I accomplished it in spite of my personality, but maybe it helped.
I thought it was getting kind of personal there. Manager Olson.
I agree with Manager Miller's comment. The work also that Anna has done out there to coordinate meetings and get input from all the stakeholders in the cities and the townships and the people that are doing projects builds our credibility with everybody. when you have a public hearing, the way they're talking about it, it's something a little bit different than normal. Instead of having people come and debate it, it's a lot of times, because of the way we've done things, those public hearings turn out to be this huge body of support. And when you get a room full of people and they're all cheering for the same thing, it's very comforting for the decision makers to be able to say, this is where, this is where we're going, this is what we put in place. So they're trying to take a leadership position, and in any kind of new position when there's leadership involved, and it's the first time for them to do something, there's new challenges, and your creativity and your tenacity are unprecedented out there. And so you've done very well for us, both this organization as well as Fitzroy County. So thank you very much.
Thanks. It's
It's
been
been
a
a lot of work on your part, but there's so much excitement right now that it couldn't be easier. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you. The commissioners are really supportive. I think to Manager Miller's point, they really understand what we're trying to do, why we're trying to do it, and how we're going to go about it, and supportive of that. And I've spent, time 5-6 years ago in front of the county board where it wasn't like that at all. So
Very
I think
diplomatic way of
it's been a good team effort.
Thank you. Are there other questions or points of discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? None opposed. Thank you. Before we move to item 12.2, which is a closed session, we'll go to 13.1, which is the administrator's report. Mr. Rudolph.
Thank you, President White and managers. I have a few items to go through on a list here. The first one is actually a suggestion to have a motion that there's a draft language in front of each of you. The managers had already approved the establishment of a surety savings account with our financial facility, our institution, and this just directs the initial opening deposit to be made. And the Board of Managers approves any and all payments from the surety account. So this allows that would continue, and I would have the authority to make transfers of balances between a surety checking and a surety savings account, just to make sure that we have the funds available to cover those expenses.
Thank you. Is
Move approval.
motion, is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Manager Rognes. Those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you.
A few other updates. I attended the association, the Minnesota Association of Watershed Administrators. That's kind of a new name and bylaws to that group for MAUD. Yesterday they had the meeting in Fergus Falls, Minnesota. So I drove up there. The colors are changing quite a bit more as you get a little bit further north. So that's coming our way. And just a few highlights from that is that the 2017 MAUD annual meeting will be on start Thursday, November 30th through Saturday, the 2nd of December in Alexandria. They've been conducting the MAUD Executive Director search and selection process. I understand there were over 50 applicants for that role. They had 6 initial interviews, and then 2 finalists were selected for second interviews, and they hope to make that choice in the coming weeks, and they want that person to be in place for their annual meeting.
Do we know who they are?
I'm not sure if it's official. I know who the 2 finalists are. One is a watershed district administrator from southwestern Minnesota, and one is somebody who recently moved from Iowa to Rochester. His wife has a position there recently, so those are the 2 finalists that I'm aware of. Then also the summer tour is going to be close by next summer. It's going to be in the southwest metro area, focusing on Minnesota River, whole basin probably. So Riley, Purgatory, 9 Mile, and Lower Minnesota River watershed districts are going to be involved in putting that together. So that will be next June. So that might be something that might be easier for a lot of us to participate in next year, and we'll likely plug into some of the planning and efforts as we can too. Since you last met, the city of Edina had its meeting, and they advanced the Arden Park projects, the concept plan, and to partner with the watershed district. That will be coming back to this group in a public hearing on October 12th, followed by an opportunity for your consideration to approve the project agreement and authorize the contract for design services. As James mentioned a little bit earlier when he was talking about some of the activities in 6 Mile Halsted Bay sub-watershed, the LaSarge Sam's Outdoor Heritage Council met earlier today, and staff attended, and we had already received kind of advance notice of their levels of allocation. They had gone through a process where each member of the council kind of had done their own allocations, and then they had an average allocation, which was called the chair's allocation. And so for our request for $795,000, the chair's allocation of that was $567,000, which is 71% of the request. As Anna noted, that was actually the highest level of request for any of the proposals. So our staff is confident that we can have some good achievements based on that reduced level of funding, even though it wasn't our full request. So now we're in the process of trying to re-budget and kind of redefine the outcomes of that project to make sure that we're successful. And then we'll kind of have some reporting back to them in terms of how the funds would be allocated to accomplish the goals. And then, of course, it will be recommended to the legislature, and then it would be the legislature has to act on this next session, and then it would become available as grants funds on July 1st, the beginning of next fiscal year for the state. And I think all of this and the work that Anna and Eric and Fieldseth and James and others have done really puts us in a really good position, not only for this round of funding, but also for future rounds of funding. So I think that has been a great process in terms of developing that level of, just like we're talking about with Carver County, developing that level of credibility going forward as well. I do have a couple updates on aquatic invasive species. There's an article, or actually the DNR made an announcement, I guess, that there was one zebra mussel found in Lake Harriet near a landing area, near a boat launch. Our staff assisted staff to do kind of a survey, and there were no additional individual or zebra mussels found, and they don't know whether that was something that was likely brought in on a boat, but it seemed like that was pretty well contained. Also on Lake Minnewaska, in the past week, or about a week or so ago, there are 4 juvenile zebra mussels found near the access. And right now, again, they're not sure if that's a new introduction or a remnant zebra mussel from last year's. We had conducted, in partnership with Carver County and the Lake Association, a treatment last year. Right now, there's some consideration for what they might do. Carver County and Lake Association have some interest in treating it. Carver County owns barrier curtains, and there's some leftover chemical that would treat an area close to that size of the launch area. So far, we're just serving as a technical assistance role. There's Eric Fieldseth will participate in a meeting tomorrow to kind of strategize, and there's been no formal request of our district resources in any other way right now. As President White mentioned earlier, there was an event last Saturday, and although we missed each other there, one of my kids and I attended the prairie seed collection event, and we got, I'm not sure if it was a bushel or not, but it was probably 3/4 of a paper grocery sack full of seeds, and it was kind of fun to walk through that property too. I'd never really explored and walked through that whole prairie area, and it was hot, but it was a beautiful walk through the prairie. There's one more of the 9th of our 10 events for our 50th anniversary is coming up this Saturday. It's Public Lands Day hike, and it had been scheduled initially for Coldwater Springs. We've actually changed the location to be Minnehaha Falls in the Glen area there, just mainly due to parking issues and having better access to where people will be on a nice weekend. We're working with Wilderness Inquiry. They're going to be leading some hike activities and guided tours, including a scavenger hunt activity for kids. So that's this coming Saturday. And then, of course, the final event will be on Thursday, November 2nd, which is our celebration event, and also the opportunity to provide the Watershed Hero Awards. And those are my updates.
Thank you. Do we have anything new on Big Island?
Yes, we do have some information. I met with Manager Loftus and Gabriel Jabor last week to talk about some of the recent developments at Big Island. They're actually meeting right now. The Big Island Committee is meeting this evening at 7 o'clock. So I chose to come here instead of there. they're kind of advancing some of their plans and opportunities. Since I met with you last week, I've learned just earlier today that they have been able to place a storage container out on the island that was installed that we had approved as being complying with the conservation easement to put some equipment for maintaining the property on. And I understand they also have done, as part of the kind of fixing some of the excessive and unallowed trimming that they had done of some of the vegetation. They had a wood chipper that has also gotten rid of some of that brush and the branches that was requested by our land management staff to prevent any harm. And the wood chips will be kind of put on some of the dirt pathways. So I understand that was done too. I had some communication today from city staff. And we are going to be following up them on a regular basis. I do have a meeting, I think, scheduled for towards the end of next week with Minnesota Land Trust to further kind of our discussions with them and how we might partner with them in terms of managing that conservation easement as well.
Thank you. Any other questions for Mr. Riddle? Then we'll move to item 12.2, and Mr. Smith, would you state the reasons for a closed session?
Yeah, Madam President, managers, we'd ask that you approve a motion to authorize going into closed session for the purpose of receiving legal advice about an unemployment compensation claim.
Is there a motion to go into closed session?
So moved.
Manager Miller, is there a second?
Second.
Rognus, all those in favor?
Aye.
Then at this time, we will go into closed session.